July 4th, 1955, Bel-Air, California. Norma McCauley had it all: wealth, a beautiful home, and a prominent place in high society. But behind closed doors, she harbored a dangerous secret, a love affair with a man who at first had been nothing more than her employee. When he was no longer welcome in her home or her bed, she'd moved on, but he couldn't. And what started as passion burned into obsession. But what drove this man to kill? And how did a Bel-Air socialite become the victim of a lover scorned? This is Norma Thompson McCauley, the heiress and the houseboy. Hey, y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Pottorff. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And for our friends in Egypt.
Okay.
Alenwa Salen.
Very nice.
Well, it was close.
Rob and I have both been sick.
Yep.
So if you hear my voice start to go or I wheeze into this microphone, I apologize from the get-go.
Or if I sneeze in the middle of the bless your hearts, you'll know what's going on.
We can't seem to kick it.
This stuff is nasty.
But wherever you are listening, hopefully you're not sick.
Yeah.
Be sure to subscribe to Hitched to Homicide, then like, rate, and review the podcast so others who are just like you and love true crime can find us. And if you are watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below.
Yes.
If you want true crime with us all the time, please join our closed Facebook group. We're getting so many new people in there. Welcome. Got one in, Anya, to all the new people in our Facebook group, the In-Laws and Outlaws. Go to Facebook and type in H2H In-Laws and Outlaws. Answer a couple questions. You are in. Go join. I post lots of photos. We discuss the cases in there. Lots of good people. People share like that they're going on trips for something, and everybody's very supportive. Love them.
Yep.
Great people.
Yep.
You can find us on Instagram at Hitched to Homicide or on X at H2H_podcast. And we also now have, I don't know why I'm saying now, because we've had it forever. We have a Buy Me a Coffee link, and if you want to send Rob some coffee, you can do that. You can find that link at the top of our show notes.
And in honor of the show, this is actually the first coffee that I've had in over a week, just because I haven't been in the mood for coffee because I've been sick.
God love his heart, y'all. That man flu will get you every time.
So cheers.
You can send us a text, too, by the way. The link to that is at the top of the show notes. It says, send Chris and Rob a text. This is an older case. I buried my nose in piles of newspaper articles, and buddy, let me tell you, there was some good stuff in there.
All right.
Never knew you could buy shoes for $2.50 in 1954 and 1955.
Oh, 1954.
But apparently you could.
Okay.
Before we get started, let me thank some sources. Medium.com, the Los Angeles Times, the Los Angeles Mirror, the California Eagle, the Daily Journal, Find a Grave, FamilySearch.org, Wikipedia, and John Russell Crooker Jr. versus the state of California.
Ah, all right. Well, you ready?
I am.
Let's do it.
Norma Alberta Thompson is born in Alberta, Canada. Don't know if her middle name was named after the town she was in, but it made me think of that movie Four Christmases, where one of them was Orlando because they were all named where they were conceived.
Well, my middle name is United, so that makes sense.
It is not. Norma Alberta Thompson is born in Alberta, Canada on September 28th, 1921. Her parents are John Arthur Thompson and Helen Sinclair Thompson. Her dad, I think, goes by Jack, or maybe it's her younger brother. But there are so many Johns in this case. It sounds like I'm a sex worker talking about work.
The Johns.
There's so many Johns in this case. I will try to make sure that everybody knows which John I'm talking about.
All right.
Okay. But her parents are John Arthur Thompson and Helen Sinclair Thompson. Her mom goes by Lena. Norma will have a younger brother who I think goes by Jack. He's 4 years younger than she is. He's also John Thompson. Norma's dad moved the whole family from Canada to Los Angeles in 1922 and began developing real estate. He will become an extremely wealthy man in the next 20 years. And he wanted the best for his children. Norma and Jack were raised in a mansion overlooking the Bel-Air Country Club.
Nice.
So he was like a construction guy. He was a developer, and he developed this whole area of Bel-Air.
Oh, wow.
Her father has become so wealthy, developing Los Angeles, and subsequently, Norma is a socialite and an heiress to her father's fortune. She attends the University of Southern California and pledges Alpha Gamma.
Okay.
But Norma didn't think she was very pretty. And she really didn't like her red hair, honey.
What? Come on.
She's a redhead. And because she didn't have a lot of confidence, she wasn't very confident of being flirty around men. In 1945, after her college graduation, she volunteered at the Officers Courtesy Bureau in Union Station. And it's here that she meets the dashing Air Force Major Frank McCauley.
Dun, 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 dun.
It really is. Let me tell you a little bit about Frank.
All right.
And this is really for Rob's benefit and anyone else who loves World War II history.
All right.
Frank Edward McCauley was born in Hicksville, Ohio, and raised on a large farm, a dairy farm. He went to Michigan State and graduated in 1939 with a degree in agricultural engineering.
And the fact that he went to Michigan, we won't hold that against him.
We went to Michigan State.
I don't care.
It's in the same state, so okay.
I'm a Buckeye, so anything north of us is...
I know. He was born in Ohio. You got to hand him that at least.
I'll give that to him.
After this, Frank enlisted in the U.S. Army and quickly transferred to the Air Corps. He trained to fly fighter planes in Texas before being stationed in England. He flew his P-47 fighter,
Nice.
the Rat Racer, on 46 missions.
Wow.
Supporting and protecting B-17 bombers.
Yep.
Rob is just all grins right now because he loves all this stuff.
Yeah, the P-47 and the P-51 were the two that really protected those guys because they were sitting ducks up there. I mean, they had to fly the mission and, they had to fly through flak because they couldn't deviate. They couldn't avoid it. Yeah, those are some brave kids.
Well, he successfully shot down 5.5 enemy aircraft. I don't know what the half is, but 5.5 enemy aircraft, achieving ace fighter pilot status.
I think the half came from if he and another pilot.
Oh,
hit the
okay.
same
That makes
plane,
sense.
They shared it. Yeah.
Okay. Frank returned home in 1945, having earned the Silver Star, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and 4 Air Medals. He would eventually receive the Congressional Gold Medal that was presented collectively to all 1,447 American aces.
Nice.
He is 5 years older than Norma.
Okay.
So he's handsome and he's accomplished and he's an American hero. And she meets him at Union Station, and he and Norma fall in love and get married within months of meeting each other. And as a wedding present, Norma's father gives the couple land in Bel-Air and then paid for their new home to be built. Now that's a wedding present.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Norma's dad brought Frank into the business of real estate development. Now, this house they're building, that her dad is building for her, it took a while to design and build. It was called the Wife Saver. Not Lifesaver, but the Wife Saver.
Okay.
Because it had so many features to it that would save a wife time, which made me giggle.
Yeah.
And these were the houses that were in the new California style, where the backyards like dropped off to the cliffs. And they all had swimming pools and elaborate barbecues. And these homes were all on one level, and they had that really modern feel to them.
Sure.
Like, there are a lot of movies that are shot. I'm thinking of the Charlie's Angels movie where he's like it's all glass and it overlooks,
right.
It just falls off into the cliffs. That's basically where all these people are living, and that's what her father had developed.
It's that basic Malibu Beach 50s style kind of.
Exactly. Only it's in Bel-Air. Yeah. Now, over the next few years, Frank and Norma have 3 sons, Craig, Kirk, and Kevin. Loved that they were all the K sound, because I have a sister named Kim and Chris. Yeah. But even though they're playing happy couple, this marriage is not a good one. He's gone all the time. And this handsome World War II hero, I think he was probably having affairs on the side. And remember, Norma isn't all that confident in herself.
Yeah, okay.
I read that Frank would ignore Norma at social functions,
really?
Which makes you wonder if the boy from Ohio who made it good married into the wealthy Thompson family for more than just love.
Yeah.
In 1952, a feature story in the LA Times Home magazine is all about how this new house is a wife-saving home. It was, quote, designed to simplify housekeeping and to increase living enjoyment for a family with small children, end quote. It had lots of built-in storage cabinets. It created places for toys. Everything in the house was washable with soap and water. The upholstery and rugs were cotton, and the radiant heated slate floor could be hosed down.
Jeez.
That's called foreshadowing.
Uh-oh.
Nothing like being able to wash down the floors afterwards.
Yeah, it sounds like a car wash.
But these two aren't getting along privately, but publicly it was all smiles. So he's trying to keep Norma happy, and Frank and Norma hire some help for around the house. They didn't hire a maid. They hired a houseboy, which kind of made me giggle because I was in a sorority, just like Norma, and we had houseboys. I lived at the Chi Omega house, and we had houseboys. And they only worked at dinner time, and I always had a class late at night, so I always ended up eating what was called a late plate with the houseboys. So I knew our houseboys very well.
Were they also students, or who were they?
A couple of law students, a medical school student. I mean, they got paid. Yeah. So it was just like an easy job to do for a very short period of time at night because they were just there for dinner. All That's it.
Okay.
But in exchange for room and board, this houseboy, he gets a small stipend. He would be responsible for babysitting, bartending. I mean, those two things, those just go together. If you're babysitting, you got to be able to make a drink, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And other like odd jobs around the house. And I guess this was pretty commonplace back then. So enter John Russell Crooker Jr. John, another John, was born on February 19th, 1924 to his father, John and Pearl Crooker. He has 6 sisters. Wow. He's the only boy in 7 siblings. Okay. He was born and raised in Bucksport, Maine, with an abusive father who was a carpenter and painter by trade, but then purchased the E.L. Warren Insurance Agency in Bucksport in 1928 and ran the business with his wife, Pearl. Okay. He's kind of a loner, and he was known to be aloof at times. He graduated from Bucksport High School. Here's the thing. John was a bedwetter, an adult bedwetter.
Oh, wow.
John served in the Navy as a radar man and attended the University of Maine and USC before eventually getting his bachelor's degree at Pepperdine in Malibu. Now, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If you go to Pepperdine, I don't know how in the world you make it to class. Yeah. Because if you've ever seen this campus right there in Malibu, it's crazy. It's the most beautiful place ever.
Sure is.
So while he's at Pepperdine, he was into theater productions, and he was a star of the debate team. John is then studying law at UCLA. He's 3 years older than Norma, and he's been married twice before he meets the Thompson family.
Mercy.
John's first marriage was to a woman who, like him, was from Maine. She lost interest in him And he was so distraught that he tried to commit suicide after this marriage fails.
Okay.
When he made it to California and Los Angeles, he met another woman, Marion Frances Wooldridge, who was 10 years older than he was. He got her pregnant. Then they got married, but soon separated after his son Jay is born. They were apart, but then they briefly got back together, and in this time, she gets pregnant again. And this time, he would have a daughter, Christina. And they separated once more, lived separate lives, but he did see his children on a pretty regular basis. But he and his wife are not divorced. And this is what he's got going on when John meets the Thompsons.
Okay.
And he's studying law at UCLA.
Okay.
Now, Norma's not necessarily a beauty queen, but she was the daughter of a wealthy man, and she'd grown up with the best of everything. She's well-dressed. Her makeup was always perfect. She had her hair styled each week. And when John meets her, he thinks she is, quote, a rather attractive, quiet, unpretentious, friendly, sweet-dispositioned, socially very attractive person, end quote.
Okay.
You're going to find that John Crooker is very prolific with his words.
All right.
We've got a few quotes from him.
Okay.
When John and Norma meet, I think she was feeling pretty neglected by Frank, her husband. Norma and John would have these long conversations because they were spending hours together while he's working around the house, or if they stopped and had some coffee. She starts to think of John as more than just the houseboy or the help. She's confiding in him, and she tells him, according to John, that she wasn't happy in her marriage and that Frank was out catting around on her. And she even spoke with her parents about getting a divorce. Again, according to John,
Right.
He said that he overheard this conversation. So she didn't confide in him that she wanted a divorce when he first arrives on the scene. But he is sort of her confidant, according to him.
All right.
Norma and Frank hosted tons of parties in this new house, at this wife-helping house. And their friends thought that John, the houseboy, they thought he was charming. He was always tending bar for these social occasions. And all the other attorneys that worked with Frank liked him and knew that he was in law school at UCLA. And some of them even offered him a job in their firm after he graduated.
Wow.
Now, at one of these parties that took place, it was September 12th, 1953. The party's raging and the drinks are flowing. And as the night progressed, John would even take off his white coat and join in the partying at Norma's encouragement. She was like, come on, John, get out from behind the bar, take off that white coat, come play, come dance with us.
Right.
So he's out on the dance floor cutting a rug with the Thompson's friends. But one night after one of these Frank and Norma's parties, Norma and John were the only two still awake. Frank had gone to bed. All their other guests had gone home. She's helping John to clean up after the party, and they sit down and they talk by the fire as the radio played. And then they slow danced, and then they kissed for the first time. According to John, it was, quote, literally like two school children in a newly found first love. We sat there and held hands and talked and literally quaked in feelings for each other, also in the thought of having such feelings and having kissed while she was still married and her husband was there in the home, end quote.
Okay, John may have been prolific, but he was the exaggerated run-on sentence.
He was the exaggerated run-on sentence, and yes, he said literally like a Kardashian twice in the same sentence. We were literally like schooled, literally.
Yeah.
Ugh, whatever. I hate that. A week later, on September 20th, 1953, just 2 months after John started working for the Thompsons, Frank moves out of their Bel-Air home and found a new job. He's no longer working for Norma's father. And after this, Norma started the divorce proceedings. But Norma didn't want to be living with a man alone in her home with her 3 little boys. The optics of that weren't good, even though John was just the houseboy.
Right.
So Norma asked for one of her girlfriends to move in with her. But over the next few months, John is playing with Norma's boys and fixing this and that around the house and falling into Norma's bed and into love.
Wow.
Behind closed doors, these two talked about maybe someday getting married, but they kept their relationship a secret, at least as best they could, because these two are actually going out on dates. They would go to the Sapphire Lounge in Inglewood, where they wouldn't run into anyone that they knew. And later, a waitress at the Sapphire would say that John was very affectionate with Norma. Quote, the only way I can describe it, he treated her like she was a china doll, end quote.
Okay.
Well, she was probably picking up the tab.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Sapphire.
Who's paying for all this?
Yeah. Norma's girlfriend lived with her and John and the boys for about 7 or 8 weeks, but by Thanksgiving of 1953, she'd moved out as well. And then for the next 2 weeks, John and Norma are all alone in the house with her boys. Now, her mom and dad, who know John, the houseboy, you know, even though they have no idea what's going on, they don't like, again, the optics of John living there with their daughter, who's going through a divorce, a messy divorce.
Right.
So Norma's parents told her to have John move in with them. He would live there, sleep there at her parents' place, and then drive the 5 minutes to Norma's house. And John is spending all of his free time with Norma when he's not in class. Don't forget, he's in law school.
Right.
He was with Norma and, quote, into the early morning hours, end quote.
All right.
So he's showing up at the parents' house in the middle of the night, even though they're asleep. But in the morning, he is there.
Right.
So they know he hasn't spent the night, well, at least the full night, at their daughter's house.
Right.
Norma is keeping up her own appearances, continuing her charity work with the Opera Guild and the Women's Auxiliary and the Women's Breakfast Club and the Assistants League. I mean, she's an heiress. These are the things she's doing.
Sure.
And while John is working for Norma, she and her parents just outright gave John around $2,000. And John said that he and Norma, quote, discussed these financial aspects of our relationship quite frankly and mutually agreed these arrangements were investments in our future together. And if in any event our future together did not materialize, any financial help from her would be treated as a loan, just as any help from her mother was already being treated by me. But Norma felt we should enjoy the advantages which her circumstances offered to us, meaning her home, her car, her membership in a beach club, etc., end quote. John's living pretty high on the hog.
Yeah.
On Norma's back.
Yep.
But their different backgrounds and lives wasn't the only problem. There were bigger problems for Norma and John, bigger problems than the fact that Norma couldn't take the houseboy with her to any of the parties and galas that she has to attend. No, the problem was John's bedwetting.
Oh.
Norma's like, you need to get this under control.
You think?
So she arranged for him to see a urologist who prescribed a device. I'm so sorry, man. I'm so sorry. He prescribed a device that when inserted regularly into the urethra of his penis would stretch an internal valve. Don't know what valve that might be, but it didn't work.
Wow.
Despite all of this, John is very much in love with Norma. They do continue to see each other behind the scenes and in the daytime, in the nighttime at her house, at her parents' place, sometimes when her parents are away, and at, quote, various night spots and out-of-the-way places, end quote.
Okay.
But what is hidden always comes to light, right?
Right.
And Norma's father discovers that she's been stooping the houseboy, and he is not happy. They thought he was an ambitious guy. Look, he's a great guy. He's putting himself through law school and all. I mean, you know, Norma's dad's a self-made millionaire.
Right.
But when her dad discovers that Norma's sleeping with John, he's like, no.
Yeah.
He fires him. And when he does, John starts to cry because, according to her father, quote, I got pretty rough with him, end quote.
Wow.
But he was equally angry. Her dad is equally angry with Norma and even threatened to disown her.
Wow.
Now, by now it's June of 1954. John's been fired. Norma's a little lost. She's going through this divorce, and the one guy that, was giving her attention is now fired.
Right.
John is so distraught, he loses interest in his schoolwork, and he eventually fails his first year of UCLA law school.
Ouch.
He flunks out.
Ouch.
So he starts taking classes at Southwestern Law School in Los Angeles and finds a job in Westwood as well as a place to live in a little Hollywood apartment. And even though Norma's daddy was angry and told her not to ever see John again, what do you think happens?
I'm going to say they probably start seeing each other again.
Norma starts seeing John again. Yeah. He gives her a key to his little Hollywood apartment, and Norma is a regular. She drops by all the time. She would leave him little love notes and food. She would come by when he wasn't there, and so she would leave these little notes. But John is coming to Norma's house in Bel-Air, too. And one day, Frank, her estranged husband, who she's going through a divorce with,
right,
shows up.
Oops.
And he finds his 3 boys and John in the house.
Ouch.
And as you might imagine, Frank wasn't happy about it, and he physically removed John from the house. So the war hero grabs the guy who cries.
Yeah, and wets his bed.
And wets the bed. Not that that's his fault, right?
Yeah.
But he grabs him and shoves him out of the house.
Wow.
But even after he gets kicked out, John comes back that same night.
He's like the dog that just won't
go away. So even the other men in Norma's life are telling her, stay away from John. She keeps on seeing him. And these two start to actually entertain friends that she trusted and his friends at John's Hollywood apartment. All the while, Frank and Norma are in the middle of this heated and ugly divorce. In March of 1955, Norma and Frank's divorce proceedings made the newspapers. I mean, he's a war hero. She's an heiress.
Yeah, and too, during that time, divorce wasn't a very commonplace thing either, especially in the socialite era.
Well, it probably wasn't frowned on, but yes. I mean, again, I hate to use the same word over again. It's the optics of it,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
But their divorce proceedings make the newspapers. She testifies that Frank humiliated her by telling her she was fat. He told her that she needed to exercise and she needed to lose weight. Now, you might think this is where the murder occurs.
Yeah.
Because Frank's an asshole, but you would be wrong.
Right.
Norma was just humiliated over it. She told the court, quote, I am 4 feet 10 inches tall and haven't weighed more than 97 pounds for years, end quote.
Yeah, that's little.
She told the court that Frank acted like a dictator and ordered her around with military commands. And if she didn't do what he said, he would give her the silent treatment. He'd just ignore her. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me just salute you.
Right.
The court gives Norma full custody of the 3 boys, $175 in monthly child support, which in today's money is a little over $2,000. She's also awarded $67,000 in community property, which is about $800,000 today.
Okay.
Norma tells the judge she doesn't want any alimony from Frank. And now that Norma is officially a divorcee, Norma and John can plan for a future together. But remember, he's married, but separated from his wife.
Right.
So he starts telling his wife that he does want a divorce. But while he's doing this, by May of 1955, just a couple months off of the divorce that Norma has, Norma starts to pull away from John. This relationship starts to hit the rocks, and Norma is acting strange, and she's kind of ghosting him, basically.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So this is really upsetting to John, so upsetting that he actually considered going to Norma's mother and confiding in her to see if she could shed some light on why Norma was acting the way she was. Now, I can only imagine he was going to go to her mom and say, I'm worried about her.
Yeah.
There's something up. It was all very self-serving for him.
Sure.
Now, there's some speculation about what's happening during this time. A man named John Baird, a public relations executive who was described as dashing. John is also married to a woman named Norma. But when Norma starts to ghost this John Baird is also married to a woman named Norma.
Okay.
But when Norma starts to ghost John Crooker, she starts to confide in John Baird. I'm sorry about all the Johns.
Yeah.
She tells John Baird that she wants out of the relationship with John Crooker, but she didn't know how, because she tells John Baird that John Crooker had told her that if she tried to leave him, he would kill her, and she was afraid.
Wow.
And when she tells John Baird this, he wants to call the police on Crooker.
Yeah.
But Norma wouldn't allow that. I mean, she's just survived a divorce where her husband said that she was fat and it ended up in the newspapers.
Sure.
If people discover that she was hooking up with a houseboy who on paper is married,
Right.
it could be devastating to her reputation.
Right.
Not to mention her dad told her to stay away from John Crooker.
Right.
He was going to disown her over it.
Yeah. Well, at this point, John Crooker actually holds all the cards.
Unfortunately, he does.
Yeah.
Norma tells John Baird that all of it was causing her to lose sleep, so much so that she actually falls asleep while talking to Baird one night while the two of them were having a conversation.
Okay.
So he does this chivalrous thing. He stays overnight with Norma, leaving at 6:30 a.m. the next morning.
What a guy.
Later, this is going to be taken at face value. He is married. His wife's name is Norma as well. He said he slept in a chair and read most of the night. Don't know if I believe that or not.
But what he's got going for him is when he's asked about it, he can say, no, listen, I was with Norma the entire night.
Yeah, just not Norma, my wife.
Yeah, exactly.
Meanwhile, while she's ghosting John Crooker and he's just beside himself, I don't know that Crooker has ever been a stable dude, by the way.
Yeah.
But he's not handling it well. He's refusing to accept that she's done with him. And she does not see him, but Crooker's really anxious. He's crying all the time, and he can't eat, and he can't sleep. Wah. You got involved with a married woman, dude. What did you expect?
Exactly.
John Crooker writes Norma a letter saying that if they break up, he was going to tell her parents that they were still having an affair. Quote, if my prayers are for naught, I will write to your father, your mother, and your brother separately and tell them that I am your husband, in fact. I will explain our love. I will describe the bond between us. I will tell them the moral course you should take. And if it is not pursued, I can no longer consider myself singly responsible before God, society, or myself for the past, the present, or the future, and I will be relieved of a great burden. End quote.
Well, that'll get her back. Jeez. Duh.
Who wants this letter?
Oh, my God.
He's basically saying, if you break up with me, I'm going to tell your parents and your brother everything that we did in the bedroom. And that, we essentially did things that a husband and wife would only do.
And I'm going to stomp my feet all around and scream and yell.
Yeah.
Jeez.
A couple weeks later, Norma agrees to meet John for lunch. After this, she tells John Baird that John Crooker demanded $300 from her. He wanted the money so he could go back to Maine. And Norma's like, here, let me give it to you. Here's the 100, 200, 300. There, go.
No problem.
Yeah, she's thinking this is money well spent.
Yep.
She pays him. He doesn't go anywhere. He continues to basically stalk Norma. He's desperate to see her. He's desperate to be with her. And on June 18th, 1955, John calls and tells Norma that he is coming over to her house. And when he gets there, he's going to hang himself in her backyard and in front of her 3 boys.
Wow.
Told ya, unstable.
Yeah, you think?
Norma calls one of her friends who tells her to call the police, and she does. And when John arrives at Norma's Bel-Air home, the police are there waiting for him. And he tells the police, I'm just here because I left a law school notebook somewhere behind. And then he leaves.
Yeah.
That night, John sends Norma a telegram saying, quote, "If unable to contact you by tomorrow, I will proceed without further consideration," end quote.
Good Lord.
So he's saying, if you don't call me, I'm going to kill myself.
Wow.
And Norma does not contact him. And guess what? He doesn't kill himself.
Of course he does.
He doesn't do anything.
Right.
Then on June 26th or 27th, Norma tells John that she just had an abortion.
Oh.
And we're going to talk a little bit about this later.
Okay.
But John sent her flowers, and on this day, John calls Norma's mother and asks to meet with her. And she tells him, I can't meet with you, John. We're getting ready to go out of town. I think they were going to Brazil. But she calls Norma and says, listen, John Crooker wants to meet up with me.
Yeah.
And Norma tells her mom, quote, "Oh, mother, don't waste any sympathy on him. He just wants money," end quote. Over the next several days, John called Norma 6 to 13 times each day.
Wow.
That's a way to get her back,
Yeah.
John Crooker. Say you're going to kill yourself. You don't do it. Demand money.
Yeah.
Send flowers. Call incessantly. Yeah.
All the stuff a woman wants to hear.
Yeah, exactly. Then on July 3rd, John came to Norma's home, and according to him, she told him that someone had found out about her abortion and was blackmailing her. She tells him that she needs to stay away from him until she can solve this situation.
Okay.
So she's basically saying, hey, I had an abortion. Somebody knows about it. You got to stay away.
Okay.
You have to stay away from me.
All right.
So did she have an abortion? Was she ever pregnant?
Yeah.
Was this her whole ruse just to get rid of him or to buy herself some time?
Yep.
Then on July 4th, 1955, while Norma's parents are away, Norma and her brother, who's also named John, for goodness sake, they decide to have a party at their mom and dad's place, which I thought was funny. I mean, they're both married, they have kids, and they're like, hey, mom and dad are gone. Let's have a 4th of July party.
Let's do a kegger.
Yeah. So they go to their parents' huge mansion. There was lots more space for the party. There's a giant pool, lots of room in the mansion. And Norma and her brother John have a cookout where their kids and adults, including Norma's boys and John Baird. And that day and into the night, Norma wore this bright red dress with a white scarf that was adorned with little pearl beads. Now, after dinner on the 4th of July, Norma takes her 3 boys and the nanny, her name is Laurie, back to their house. And she went back to the party where the remaining guests were dancing in the basement rec room. I thought that was funny. Again, dancing in the basement rec room is John Baird and his wife, the other Norma.
Right.
Then around midnight, the party breaks up. And who do you think drives Norma home?
Let me guess. John?
John Baird. He drove her home in her car while his buddies followed behind. He walked her to the front door, and then he hopped in a car with his 2 buddies, and he goes back to the Thompsons' home. I did read that there was another man who went home with her that night, too. So I'm a little confused whether it was John Baird or this other guy.
Gotcha.
But she gets taken home, and the kids are already there with the nanny.
Pretty much, though, if you just say John took her home, you pretty much
I've covered everybody.
Yeah, you've hit that target somewhere.
Now, while the party is still happening, back in Hollywood, John Crooker is losing his ever-loving mind. He's, according to him, so in love with Norma and so worried that someone was threatening her over the abortion. Not to mention, he's devastated that she's told him, it's over. Don't come near me.
Right.
I got to figure this out on my own. You got to go away.
Right.
So he drives his car to UCLA in Westwood, where he parked his car, and then he took a taxi to Norma's house. He does this while Norma is at the 4th of July party. He enters her Bel-Air home through an unlocked door, and then he hid in one of those mini closets that were so helpful for this wife-saving home. He hides in a closet by the nursery. Who does this?
Yeah.
Who thinks this is okay?
Yeah.
John Crooker. As I said, he's stalking her.
Right.
So when Norma finally comes home after midnight, she goes to her bedroom And she lays down on this chaise lounge. I can see it now. She's in her cute little red dress. She's like ripping off her scarf, throwing it in the floor and laying down on the chaise. And she looks up and suddenly John is in her room.
Oh, man.
That's like some next level thriller movie stuff, right?
That's Alfred Hitchcock to the 10th degree. It's
almost like, have you checked the children?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, the phone call is coming from inside the house. Yeah. I remember the first time I saw that, I was like, get out.
Yeah. Man.
That's a great movie, by the way, but you have to see the original one.
Yeah.
The original, I think it's like from 1977 or something.
Right.
But Norma stays calm, even though she's shocked to see John not only in her house, but in her bedroom.
Right.
Now, the nanny and the children are asleep in the house. And Norma stays calm, and she speaks with John quietly because she doesn't want to wake everybody up. Now, according to John Crooker, Norma refused to discuss the relationship, and during the 2-hour exchange, 2 hours, she's just laying on this chaise lounge while he sat nearby, chain-smoking cigarettes. Now, I think that because they drove Norma home, she'd been drinking. Makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. Why couldn't she just drive herself home? She'd driven the nanny and the boys home.
Right.
But at midnight, she had to have somebody else drive her and her car home and leave it there. Right. So she's been drinking. They're talking for 2 hours, and he's chain smoking.
Right.
And finally, Norma wants to go to bed, but John wants to talk about why Norma is rejecting him. Now, eventually, Norma falls asleep. Maybe she passed out. John stays right there by her side while he thinks about all of the things he's done to win her love back. And even though she'd been to see him and she'd given him glimmers of hope, he knows, she's told him, Norma is done. She's like, stick a fork in me, right. John, I'm done. It's over.
Yep.
It's then, according to him, while she's asleep, that he realizes that Norma is never going to love him or be with him. So he goes to the kitchen and gets a steak knife. He goes back to where Norma is sleeping on this chaise lounge. And for a while, according to him, he just sits and watches her sleep while his anger and all his emotions just work themselves and him into a lather. Finally, he grabs Norma's throat. She wakes up and starts to scream. John covers her mouth with his hand and stabs her. Then he takes the white scarf that's decorated with the little pearl beads that's lying nearby. He wraps it around her neck, and he uses it as a garrote. He suffocates her. He continues to stab her 11 times.
Jeez.
Twice above the left breast and once in the back. She was also stabbed under her left armpit. They think that those were defensive wounds, which makes sense. She's got her arm up, in front of her face. She's like doing this, right. And he's like stabbing her in her armpit.
Right.
It takes a while for Norma to actually die, but very slowly she lets go of her own life.
Wow.
Then after stealing some money from Norma's purse, John starts walking down the hill from Bel-Air back to UCLA in the middle of the night. When he gets home, he takes off his bloody clothes and puts them into the incinerator chute. And after this night, John Crooker never wet the bed again.
Really?
According to him.
Wow.
Just takes a murder, apparently.
Gee whiz.
Yeah, not some apparatus.
Man.
The next morning, Norma's 5-year-old son, Kirk, goes into his mother's room after the nanny, Laurie, asked him to go wake her. And he finds his mother's bloody body, still wearing the red dress she'd worn to the party the night before. Norma is face down with her knees on the floor as her body lays across this chaise lounge. The cover of the chaise is saturated with blood, and there are blood spots on 2 tiny little chairs that were used by the children when they would visit their mom's bedroom, which is so sweet because our kids had like little bitty seats. When they were little, they would like sit in, they had their own little like Barkle loungers.
Right.
And that's what these little boys had. They had their size chairs to sit in their mom's room. Kirk goes back to the nanny and says, quote, "Laurie, you better go in. Mommy is in a mess," end quote.
Wow.
So her body is found with the blood-spattered white scarf twisted around her neck. The police show up. They start to interview all the usual suspects. Frank, her ex-husband, who police found at his sister's home in Pasadena.
Mm-hmm.
I read in the newspaper that he collapsed when they told him that Norma, his ex-wife, was dead. He was taken to the West Los Angeles police station where he broke into tears as Detective Sergeant Jack Hooper questions him. They had to give Frank a sedative. Before they give him Mother's Little Helper, he tells police that he was with his brother in another part of California on the 4th of July and returned to his sister's house in Pasadena without ever knowing about Norma's murder.
Mm-hmm.
So they rule him out.
Right.
John Baird was the last person to see Norma alive, him and the other guys that helped drive her back to the house.
Sure.
He told the police that the ex-houseboy had threatened to kill her if she broke up with him, and that Norma told him that herself. And they head directly to the former houseboy John Crooker's apartment. Now, they eliminate Frank and John Baird. They show up at John Crooker's Hollywood apartment. It's called the Jardinette Apartments at 5128 Marathon Street in Hollywood. While they're there, they question him. Then they take him into the police station and question him for hours. And I think what happens next is because they knew he was the killer.
Okay.
He tells the police that he had taken a drive to the beach on Monday, July 4th and had returned home alone to go to bed. They want him to take a polygraph test. And he's saying to them, look, I made it through one. I flunked out of one law school and now I'm in another law school. And I know I don't have to take a lie detector test. He was very aloof. He was kind of like, you're just a police officer.
Right.
I've been to law school. I don't have to take this lie detector
I'm the
test.
smartest guy in the room.
Yeah, I think he offended the police officers. They want to search his apartment, but he resisted this search. And West LA detective Jack Gotch and Bill Stambler, they tell him, you're being investigated for murder. And he didn't ask once, whose murder? Who's dead?
Yeah.
He never asked.
Yeah.
That's just crazy to me.
Not a very smart law student.
He was booked on suspicion of murder and taken to the crime lab in downtown LA, where the officers photographed scratches on the knuckles of his left hand, as well as his neck and under his chin. They planned to compare the skin particles from under Norma's nails. John tells the police that the scratches were because he'd had a minor car accident. They couldn't find any evidence of this. And the scratches on his neck was from a shaving incident. Lies, all lies. Yeah. Back at Norma's house, police found a packet of letters in her bedroom. Police described as, quote, intellectual love letters, end quote, that contained no threats, but still connected John to Norma. But what they really want is the murder weapon.
Right.
And the police are beating around the bushes around the house looking for this weapon.
Okay.
And when they can't find it, they suspect that the knife had been washed of blood and returned to its usual drawer in the kitchen. Mm. He's a houseboy. Yeah. He knows where all the knives are.
Sure.
But they hound John Crooker for 14 hours. 14 hours.
Wow.
And he finally cracks and confesses and says, quote, I'm sorry. I was in love with her, end quote.
Wow.
He admitted that he had threatened to kill her if she broke up with him. And then he wrote out a 5-page confession letter because we all know that John Crooker can't say one thing simply.
Right.
Then John Crooker got himself an attorney and he promptly recanted the confession, saying that it was all coerced after hours of physical and mental intimidation. We're going to talk about that in just a second.
All right.
Norma's funeral was attended by hundreds of people, and according to Dr. Haven N. Davis, minister of the Westwood Presbyterian Church, quote, to know her was to love her. She was always considerate and thoughtful of others. She sought always to encourage and help others, end quote. Mm. That's the 1950s version of she lit up a room. Yep. To know her was to love her.
Right.
So John Crooker is framed in the media as the unrequited lover, while Norma's dad tells the LA Times, quote, my daughter had absolutely no romantic interest in him. Of that, I'm sure, end quote.
Okay.
And in response to that, John's attorney released to the press all of the love letters that Norma had sent to John or left for him in his apartment. One of which John said was written on the morning of the murder after she'd stopped by his apartment and that she expected him to visit her that night. Really? She expected you to break into the house and wait for her while hiding in a closet, and she was at a 4th of July party that she and her brother gave at her parents' home until midnight? She was really expecting him? Yeah.
Yeah, nice try.
John Crooker will actually have 3 attorneys. First, Raymond Simpson, a man who was once John's law instructor. Then Gladys Tolles-Root, who in turn stepped down for a man named Robert Armstrong. So what does that tell you?
Yeah, each one of them are going, man, I can't win this one.
I don't want this case.
Yeah.
By the way, John's estranged wife, Marion, left town with their 2 children, saying that she didn't feel it was advisable to come to her husband's support. Quote, I do not want to get myself involved to the extent that my children will be harmed, end quote.
Good for her.
Before John goes to trial for the murder of Norma, Norma's father receives a handwritten letter that demanded $100,000 and threatened to hurt Norma and Frank's children, the 3 boys, if the money isn't received.
Whoa.
So her dad, John Jack Thompson, called the FBI.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm not messing around with this. I'm calling the FBI, right. Calling the feds.
Right.
They sent a dummy package in response to the threat. And when a 24-year-old blonde Veronica Williams picked it up at the post office on August 3rd, 1955, the FBI arrested her, and later her husband, Edgar Leon Williams, an unemployed musician.
Typical.
I was like, it's the blonde and the unemployed musician. Yeah. He wasn't a redhead. She pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 2 years. Her husband, the musician, the authorities couldn't link him to the crime. He served 0 time.
And got a record contract. No,
maybe. I just thought that was funny because they just kept, in the newspapers, they kept calling her the blonde. The blonde.
Wow.
Yeah. When John goes to trial for the murder of Norma, her family testifies about all of John's threats. A taxi driver gets on the stand and tells the court about driving John to Norma's house on the night of the murder. For the prosecution, the forensic specialist showed the court that John's fingerprints were all over the murder scene. His defense attorney, Robert Armstrong, brings out these love letters again. One that Norma wrote said, quote, please always believe that I love you every day and every minute. I love you with all my heart. I do, end quote.
Okay, but here's the thing. I mean, it's kind of a weak defense because people fall in love and out of love every day. And just because she wrote those letters doesn't mean that, whatever. Okay.
It means diddly squat.
Yeah, exactly.
Another one that she wrote said, quote, my thoughts and my love are with you constantly, honey, even during our bad moments, and I'm sure yours are with me even then, end quote. Yeah. I will say this. The art of writing a love letter it's dead.
Yeah.
People don't. I know now younger kids who get excited when they get something in the mail. That's like cool.
Yeah.
I can remember when, getting your first email was like, this is cool. This is really cool.
Exactly.
I mean, like in an instant, I'm sending somebody a note.
Yep.
But Norma's letters weren't dated. So there's a lot of back and forth over when Norma had written the letters. The defense argued that John's confession was obtained illegally because John had been physically abused. On the stand, John tells the court that a detective had punched him twice in the stomach and once in the knee, saying to him, quote, you're going to give me what I want or I'll take you outside and give you this type of treatment all night, end quote.
Jeez. Wow. Which could possibly be true.
Which could possibly be true.
Yeah, in that day and age. Yeah.
But I think that they're doing this because they know he's the killer. They know.
Sure.
John testifies that he asked for an attorney before the confession and was denied. And they had a recording of a conversation in the DA's office of a detective telling John, quote, "You don't need counsel in a case like this," end quote.
Oops. Did I say that?
But still, the Judge Stanley Mosk, admitted the confession, which was written in John's hand and signed by him. John told the court that Norma was killed by whoever was blackmailing her about the relationship and her abortion. And speaking of the abortion, in Norma's autopsy, the medical examiner said there was no evidence of an abortion. But he also said that he didn't know if that was something that was detectable by autopsy. Today, it would be a blood test to see if there was HCG in the bloodstream.
Right.
And I looked it up. It can be detectable for 2 to 6 weeks after the pregnancy has ended.
Gotcha.
So maybe she was pregnant, but was it John Crooker's? Was it John Baird's?
Mm-hmm.
Was it one of her other male friends? Was she not pregnant?
Right.
Her family may have had something to do with burying the fact that she was pregnant, if she was.
Right.
So it's kind of hard to tell. That's all pretty murky. But John tells the court that Norma told him that, quote, they, the blackmailer, wanted a, quote, great deal of money. She didn't have it and didn't know how to get it. She said if they didn't get it, they were going to ruin her, end quote. Now, I have a hard time thinking that she's saying, I don't have this money and I don't know how to get it.
Yeah.
If she went to her father and said, this is what's happening, somebody's blackmailing me,
Right.
I think that they would have taken care of things and hushed it up.
Sure.
Then Bernard Dunn, an engineer and friend of Norma's, she told him about 2 months before her murder that there was, quote, a character bothering her, end quote, referring to him only as John. Quote, about a week later, she told me that the character had wanted money and that she'd given it to him to be rid of him, end quote.
That was the $300.
Yep.
Yeah.
2 weeks before the murder, Bernard Dunn called on Norma again, and she told him that, quote, he had threatened her again, that he knew enough about law to kill her and get by with it, that if chessmen could do it, he can, end quote. And what she's talking about, she's saying that he brought up Carol Chessman, who was sentenced to death for robbery, kidnapping, and rape. He wrote a bunch of articles and books from his jail cell in San Quentin.
Okay.
He was actually executed in 1960, but apparently law school students read all of this stuff that this guy, that this Carol Chessman, that he wrote.
Right.
Then a man named Robert DiCarlo, a business manager and friend of Norma's socially, he said that she never referred to John Crooker by any name other than her former houseboy, Robert, who she called when John threatened to kill her 3 children, and then hang himself in the backyard. So remember, I said she called a friend?
Yeah.
This is who she called.
Gotcha.
She called Robert.
All right.
Quote, while we were talking, she said that she saw Crooker approaching the house. I told her to call the police. Later that day, she told me she called the police and that Crooker had lied to the officers by convincing them that she had asked him to come to her house, end quote. Then she called Robert again sometime between June 25th and 28th that John had called again threatening to call her mother and father, which he did. She told Robert that she'd told him to, quote, go right ahead, end quote, which sounds more like Norma.
Right.
A man named Fred Chell, who said he knew John from Pepperdine, told him that he was not going to, quote, let Norma get away with ending their relationship, end quote. So they actually brought in this guy, Fred Chell, who's a friend of John Crooker's from Pepperdine, thinking he's like a character witness. And he gets up on this stand and says, look, he said he wasn't going to let Norma get away with ending it.
Oh, man.
Then on the last day of the trial, the state had a surprise witness, Norma's mother. She gets on the stand in the Santa Monica courtroom with a nurse on her arm. She's on the witness stand, and Deputy District Attorney Alan McCurdy starts asking her questions. And after he asks her if she knows John Crooker, she just falls apart on the stand, starts to cry. And it takes a few minutes before she can continue. And apparently, they let that question go. She didn't have to, say yes, that she knew who he was. They just moved on to the next question, where Mrs. Thompson says that John called her on June 22nd. He wanted to meet with her, and she tells him no because she's leaving on vacation. She's going to be gone for a couple of weeks.
Right.
To which John replies to her, quote, "If you're going away for 2 to 3 weeks, it might be too late," end quote.
Man.
Yeah.
Wow.
And remember, the next night, Norma called her mom, who's packing. She wanted her mom to come over and see her. And at the time, her mom didn't realize that Norma was so worried because she'd told her mother not to waste any sympathy on John. And her mother corroborated that he just wanted money. And Norma's last words to her mother were, quote, "You should avoid John Crooker," end quote.
Wow.
John Crooker's defense was it was a bust because after the jury deliberated for 8 hours, they convicted him of first-degree murder and sentenced him to the gas chamber on December 9th, 1955. He was taken to San Quentin. He was scheduled to die in the gas chamber on April 12th, 1957. But after his death sentence, John's attorney challenged the admissibility of his confession, saying that even though he'd requested an attorney, he hadn't been provided counsel before he wrote his confession letter. And this argument goes to the California Supreme Court. And then it goes to the U.S. Supreme Court. And in a 5-4 decision, they uphold John Crooker's conviction, saying that having completed 1 year of law school, he was capable of managing his way through the interrogation process without an attorney.
Oops.
So all of that bravado and the way he acted with the police,
Sure.
it came back to bite him in the butt.
Yep.
Then in January of 1958, the newly elected governor Edmund D. Pat Brown appointed the same judge, Judge Stanley Mosk, who had presided over John's trial, as his attorney general. And Judge Mosk, now A.G. Mosk, himself questioned his own decision to admit the confession in the first place. And with Mosk's encouragement, Governor Brown commuted John Crooker's sentence from death to life imprisonment without parole on January 15th, 1959. So he was scheduled to die in April of 1959. But as soon as the old judge on his trial becomes the AG, he talks the governor into commuting the sentence.
Wow.
Governor Brown stated, quote, "The record clearly shows, and I personally believe, Crooker is guilty of murder in the first degree, but his crime was caused by passion and emotional factors and was not one committed for gain," end quote. So I guess if you kill in a crime of passion, that's different if you're killing for money.
Wow.
But in fact, in 1960, John Crooker confesses to murdering Norma to the associate warden at San Quentin. His name is Lewis S. Nelson. 8 years later, Governor Brown commuted his sentence even further, allowing parole, which John received in 1972.
Oh, my gosh.
Now, I don't think that his confession makes it out until after he's out and just disappears.
Jeez.
He immediately married a woman who he divorced 6 years later. He married a fourth time, and he remained married to her when he died in Multnomah, Oregon on November 1st, 1992. He was 68 years old.
Wow.
So he confesses to the murder. He tells everybody.
Yeah.
He tells her. She tells everybody, "I'm going to kill her. If she leaves me, I'm going to kill her." He follows through with it, right? Then he confesses to it on paper and to all these cops. Then he recants it. And then the judge who lets the confession into the courtroom gets a guilty conscience and goes to the new governor and says, "I feel bad about this. Let's give him life in prison instead of, the death penalty."
Wow.
And then they just commuted it again and let him go free in 1972.
Amazing.
And then he lived a very quiet life on his own with 2 more women, 2 more wives, until he died 20 years later in 1992.
Who are these women that married him?
I don't know. I don't know.
Jeez.
Who could say?
Wow.
Who could say? I did think it was interesting that as soon as he killed Norma, that he never wet the bed again.
Yeah.
What is that?
I know.
And that's according to him.
Right.
But that is the story of the heiress and the houseboy. It's a cautionary tale, but that's all I have to say about that. For nearly 7 years, Jane Doe has lived in the shadows, her past buried deep beneath layers of secrecy and silence. After completing more than was asked of her in her last assignment for the enigmatic Kywolf project, Jane Doe vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of dead bodies and unanswered questions. But now, as the specter of her past returns with a vengeance, Jane finds herself thrust back into a world she thought she'd left behind forever. When her former sins come knocking on her door, Jane is faced with an impossible choice: continue to hide in the shadows, or once again take up arms against the forces that threaten to tear apart the fabric of society. With enemies lurking around every corner and allies who may not be what they seem, Jane must rely on her wits, training, and her unyielding determination to survive. And while trust is a luxury she cannot afford, Jane must confront the truth about herself and her past. As the clock ticks, she realizes that the line between family, friend, and foe are razor thin, and in the end, the only person she can rely on is herself. Jane Doe 4 Charlotte is available September 24th, 2024. No name, no regrets, no mercy.
You know, I don't know which is worse, the fact that someone would get the death sentence or they would be sentenced to life in prison.
In San Quentin,
yeah,
no less.
In San Quentin. I don't know which is worse. I mean, if you get the death penalty, at least it's done, you know?
Yeah, it's over.
Yeah. You're going to spend the rest of your life in hell, however. But,
what's worse,
yeah.
spending the rest of your life in San Quentin or...
Maybe it's one and the same.
Or maybe.
Yeah, could be.
Maybe.
Wow.
I know.
Well, so it's just amazing that he got out. That's crazy.
It is. It's crazy, but it was such an interesting story. You know, I love the ones like from the 50s. I love all the more historical ones.
Oh, yeah. Just
because the newspapers give you tons of information and a lot of it is conflicting. So, you know, sometimes it's like you have to read all of them to get through it and be like, okay, I think this is maybe what actually happened.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I can say about the whole deal is, thank God I'm not on the dating scene. Just kidding.
No, honey, I swooped you out of that.
Yes, you did. 17
years ago?
I know.
Was that right?
Yeah.
Y'all, he's the one who remembers, not me. I'm always like, how many years has it been now?
And I'm older and I still remember.
What day did we get married?
Oh, well. All right. Well, let's move on from that and do a little bless your heart.
Well, bless your heart.
All right. Number one, I'm calling. He was definitely on the naughty list.
The naughty list.
Yeah, and these are relatively short, but they're funny.
Okay. They pack a punch.
Yes. A burglar in Wisconsin was hiding in a closet last week when the people who lived there found him. So he held the door shut and pretended to be Santa. He said, ho, 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 and told them not to open the door or it would ruin their Christmas surprise. He's facing charges for trespassing and resisting arrest.
That's pretty good. And very apropos since our killer was hiding in a closet.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Number two, I'm going to call nice rug.
Oh, gosh. I hope this is about a toupee.
It is. This actually just happened recently. A guy was busted smuggling drugs from Colombia to Spain last month because of his ridiculously high toupee.
I've seen pictures of this.
The police were suspicious of why the guy's hairpiece was riding so high on his head. And it turned out he had a bag with $33,500 worth of cocaine underneath of it.
And he just looked at himself and said, I have this beaver on my head and nobody's going to think anything about it.
What's funny is that, I saw the picture of it. It looks more like a tumor than it does a toupee. It's ridiculous. All right, number three, and finally.
Okay.
And on the third day, a guy in Tennessee was busted for doing $30,000 in damages to a cemetery on Monday. Yeah. When asked why he did it, he said he was digging around the cemetery because his grandmother was buried there.
My gosh.
And he was trying to resurrect her. He's now facing charges for vandalism and criminal trespassing.
Now I'm getting the third day thing, but it took, I was like, are we creating? What did we do? Let there be light. I was trying to figure out where we were.
Yeah. He was going to resurrect Grandma.
Oh my gosh. And he was digging up the cemetery?
Yes, he was digging, but who knows what he was really doing.
He took some ghosts. There's some people not happy with him.
Yeah.
If he's in jail, they went with him. They're gonna bother him for the rest of his life.
That's kind of like really, really bad karma. Yeah.
Well, if you have a bless your heart or you know somebody's heart who needs blessing, all you got to do is go to hitchedtohomicide.com. When you get there, you can find a pull-down menu. While you're there, you can also suggest a case, and you can tell us about your brush with true crime.
Do it.
That's my amazing husband out there who's been so sick. God love his heart, and it's all because of me, because I'm the one who brought it home.
And this too shall pass. And that's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.